Folks, let me introduce you to Trudi Lewis Boyd. She's a graduate of tech. She's got a huge, broad experience in this field of corporate communication. So it's such a pleasure to have her here. There's 1,000 different things I want to ask her, but I also don't want to use her entire day, but I could, man. So Trudi, tell us a little bit about your journey from graduating to tech to where you are now.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be with you and talk to your students. I was living in Lubbock back a few years ago, which is where I'm from, that area. And so I spoke to the tech classes a lot, PR classes, strategic comms classes. So it's good to be with you and your students today. So yes, I'm a graduate of Texas Tech. From back then, it wasn't called the College of Media and Communications. It was called MassComm.
Right.
And so I actually kind of started working early. I started working my sophomore year in college and started at KMAC, back before KMAC and KLBK were put together. So I interned there, worked there, and then moved over to KLBK, and I was eventually news director and anchor there. And from there, I had an opportunity to go to Washington with our local congressman that was elected. So I did that. And so that's what took me to DC. So I've spent a little better than 25 years working in Washington, and started off as a press secretary, then as a chief of staff. And I always say to classes, like, if you have an opportunity to go to DC, and I know it's not a great environment right now, right?
Yeah,
but
right.
it was such a great experience for me. And there's so many interns working with your local congressman or senator. So I worked on the Capitol Hill for about 10 years. And then from there, I took a couple of years off, actually, to my first child, and wouldn't take for that, loved that. And then I went over to what is, I think, the oldest and largest trade association. So that was the National Association of Manufacturers. I did media relations for them. And then most of the time after that was in public affairs. So I worked in the agency world. I've done a lot of different, I guess you'd call me a generalist. I worked with food and beverage, healthcare, ag and food, and then later energy. So one kind of, and I'll stop there. And one thing that I found is that everyone I was working with, every company and corporation I was working for, you know, they all had kind of their license to operate or their social license to operate. And that's really when I got into the energy space. And then I've talked to a lot of classes about some of my energy work. I've got the pleasure of doing so much fun work of helping them with messaging and research and doing commercials. I mean, big commercials, broadcast commercials, built websites for energy companies that didn't really want to have social media. They didn't like, they were kind of afraid of that.
Right.
And a lot of employee stakeholder engagement, and just been kind of soup to nuts. So now I'm with Chevron. And I'm 2 weeks in, living in Denver, and moved here when Chevron acquired our company. And so we're all kind of learning the Chevron way. It's been great so far, and just really proud to work for this great company.
Nice. Let me ask, since you said soup to nuts, it does remind me of a question I want to make sure I answer before I lose it. What do you think are these students, the majority are freshmen, sophomore, this may be their first class in communications. Okay. What do you think are the skills needed for corporate communications? And what are some ways they could get into that? Think of it as a potential career.
Yeah, great question. I always, I kind of go back to the roots, right? And having good writing skills, just being able to, I think if you can write well, you can do about anything.
Right.
And those skills are certainly transferable to whatever industry you're working in. And so I always reiterate that. I was a broadcast major, but I would have my print teachers at Tech say, you're writing like broadcast. And my broadcast teachers would say, you're writing like print. But hopefully I figured it out along the way. But really good writing skills, being able to effective communications, external and internal communications, and really just analytical thinking, just being curious, willing to learn. I think it's a kind of a West Texas way to, a hardworking ethic. And that has served me well over the years, because I think sometimes when I went to Washington and I was like a little city girl, kind of, my high school was like 66 graduating seniors in that class. So I think when you go to DC, I was like, wow, all of these smart people, but you really learn to work hard. And I think if I go back, if I could give myself advice, sometimes fear really prevents you from doing your best work. It can be
Right.
crippling. And sometimes I think if I had to go back and say, one success begets another. So you get confidence in what you're doing, and it gives you more confidence in the next task. There's times, even now, there's times that I'm like, can I do this? It's just that little inner
Yeah.
voice.
Right.
And, you just tackle it on, you go head on and do it and work hard and get good people around you. I always also say, like make sure that when you're working, like you've got as smart people, if not more so than you, because you'll have a much better product.
Right. Right. Nice. Nice. And how can they get into this field? What are some ways to access?
Yeah, there's so many, agency world is, again, that's what I did most of my career. And, that kind of means starting at the bottom, get internships. I had one woman that worked for me. She had done 6 internships before
Good.
she ever came to work for me as an intern. Of course, she was a rock star at that point. I wanted to hire her immediately, once the internship was over. So if you can't get an internship, reach out to friends and colleagues and companies and offer to shadow, offer to do free work, offer to, provide some, and we've got a great network with the National Association Professional Board. I'm on that. We're willing to help you make contacts for you. And I know that's why I like to come back to tech when we have those meetings once a year. I've met a lot of students, but I would say, just really, make sure you're using LinkedIn, you're looking, at colleagues, potential colleagues, and always realize that your first job is not going to be maybe your most loved work, right? But you've got.
I know you've only been at Chevron now a couple of weeks, that you were with Noble Energy. They were acquired by Chevron. But one of the things the book talks about is know the story of your company. What do you think is the story or the vision of Chevron?
Yeah, so just for a timeline. So we were acquired in July, and then the acquisition was final in October. So I actually started on October 5th was our date to starting with Chevron. And I worked on the integration, which again, that was one of those things like, can I do this? I've never worked like on huge multinational company integration. So it's been since October. I've only been I was assigned to this role in Colorado, so I've only been on the ground here. We didn't feel a great need to hurry up and get into the office because, most of us are all kind of still working from home. But Chevron is what they say is the human energy company. And what I like about the culture, and we're still really learning them, but they have a lot of similarities to the company that I worked for before. And so they're really trying to drive energy that improves lives, it powers the world. They want to be recognized as the most admired company for doing what they do. And I often feel like, the oil and gas industry, and Chevron's doing biofuels, they're doing farm waste. I mean, they're doing a lot of work into the renewable space as well, but they kind of has a dirty name, right? I mean, you think of it as an oil field, it's really dirty, they're pumping oil out of the ground or natural gas. And since I've been able to work in the industry for a while, I've learned that it's a lot like NASA underground. So, learning the science behind it, learning how the work is done. I think when people learn that, they're really surprised. But, we've got this, what we call the Chevron way. So it's, who we are, what we believe, how we try to go above and beyond, and then making sure that we're, aspiring to go to the places we want to go to. So I think that's kind of our general theme of the company. And it's evolving. We're doing some things, and this is what I would tell students also, as you continue to evolve of what you want to do and how you're growing your education and then later your career, it's not stagnant. You always need to learn. And in the company, we're doing that right now with the Chevron way. We're kind of looking to see, is it relevant in this day's times of a pandemic and all the changes that are going on?
Well, is it relevant, and how are you sharing that story? What are the channels you're using to share what the Chevron way is?
Yeah, so we really utilize all the channels. And again, I mentioned briefly at the top was, we helped to build some social platforms for my previous company back when, I'll tell you, the C-suite, the CEO included, did not want to have social. They didn't want to have Facebook. They didn't want to be on Twitter. Oh my gosh, and we had to write their policy, their social media policy. Now it's and they learn that, okay, this is a good thing. And if you're going to, if you're going to exist and be this kind of a company, you have to be transparent. You're going to get some hits, and but you have to provide information in the formats that people utilize them. So
Right.
yeah, we're using all the platforms, a lot of video. I mean, that's the big, because I had a video background, I like the video piece. We know that's how people really like to receive a lot of information. So we do a lot of video work. We do a lot of research on messaging to make sure, our messages resonate with consumers and our neighbors and communities where we live. But we do use all the channels from Facebook to LinkedIn to Twitter, all of them really.
What do you think is the American perspective on Chevron? And you talked about doing research. How are you doing that research to find those things out?
Yeah, so, again, I think that sometimes the oil and gas industry certainly does, take its hit like a lot of industries but we need energy. We need energy to function and to empower our world and to run our businesses and our homes. And I think sometimes people don't always know what goes into, if you're making a pair of skis, like here in Colorado, or snowboards, you're going to have products, that we produce.
Right.
But I would say that, how we do messaging, we've done messaging, and I'm a big fan of it. I always think the best campaigns I ever worked on were campaigns where we started with research, because if not, you think you might have an idea, but you don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
So, both statewide research as well as one-on-one in-depth interviews, focus groups. In fact, I'm doing this project right now since Chevron is just now coming into Colorado. So Noble, it was my former company. And so I felt really strongly when I came in, I said, I'm meeting all of our partners and our social investment partners, but I said, any good company, I feel like, you need to listen first, right? I mean, these are our neighbors, and majority of the workforce here in Colorado were former Noble legacy employees, but we need to listen. We need to know what the community, I didn't want to flip a switch and all of a sudden our website now is Chevron and it used to be Noble. So we're doing research on that and making sure that we inform constituents and inform the communities and where we live and work that what the change looks like. And, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some already that are like, wow, that's a big multinational company. I think we're in 180 countries, that can be scary, right? So we're going to do a needs assessment, and I'm in the works of doing that right now, where we go in and we're doing a few things. We're doing some desktop research, and I want to do it particularly because of the pandemic. And
tell them what desktop research.
Desktop, yeah. So we're looking at kind of all public available sources, working with the Colorado and Wyoming health departments, looking at all the data, from food insecurity and what are the needs that, that may have changed in the last, year,
right,
and collecting all of that data. And then at the same time, we'll actually do it afterwards, doing some one-on-ones. So we're building a stakeholder list of community leaders, civic leaders, our philanthropic partners, our employees. They're our greatest resource. They want to know, because they're living in the communities, they want to know what we're doing, what we're saying. So we'll build a stakeholder list. We'll do some interviews. We'll do probably a statewide poll just to see, because I think you have to have a baseline as you're coming into a new state. You have to have a baseline to say, here's our challenges. Are our messages relevant? One thing I'm doing is I'm talking to all of our social investment partners, like the food banks and the medical centers and all those we've been big sponsors for before. Has it changed because of COVID? Do we need to put more money into food banks or food insecurity or healthcare? So those sorts of things are how we kind of apply some of the research.
So does Chevron have a charity typically, or an area of philanthropy it typically has gone after?
Yeah, so their areas are the environment, education, and economic development. So those are kind of their three pillars. And Noble, when I worked for them, had similar ones. But one thing I'm really impressed with, as a company, you would think sometimes maybe it's top down and that they're going to force us to have partners or maybe change partners because of their three pillars. They don't. That's why I'm doing this assessment and I'm talking to the partners to see, I think our employees know to a large extent who's making a difference in the communities. Where do we need to spend? Right. And it's not just writing a check. We've got a big base of employees, and they like to volunteer. I know they like to volunteer at the food bank. I know they like to volunteer at Colorado Youth Outdoors. It helps, kind of underprivileged children. So, I appreciate the fact that we're not having to kind of go back up to the mothership. They would hate me to say that word, but to get approvals that we can determine that locally, in our Rockies business. I work in corporate affairs, so I manage corporate affairs for the company here, and so I've got community.
Explain what corporate affairs means.
Yeah, so I work in corporate affairs at Noble as well. So corporate affairs encompasses a lot, and as a communications kind of background, it has communications, it has all of our social investment, it has all of our issues management. So issues that maybe are not to the crisis yet, but what does that look like? Could it be a crisis? How do we prepare for those things? How do we keep, making sure we're informed and we're taking steps so they don't become a crisis? So really everything that kind of supports the entire business unit from those areas. I know there's more that I probably can't remember, but those are kind of the strong pillars of corporate affairs. And so you get to work with, so I'm not just working with the Rockies business unit folks. I've got a whole corporate affairs team that's supplying information and help and arms and legs to me as well, and teams I can count on. So I love that collaboration. I love the fact you're meeting a lot of new people, right, and you're getting to have the expertise of different ones. And one of the things Chevron's been really great is saying is that when we were acquired, they know they have a lot to learn from us as a smaller company. We were more nimble. We could pivot easier, and you get a big company, sometimes like I was trying to set up a meeting and they're like, well, and this was like maybe a week and a half ago, oh, that'll be February 12th. I'm like, no, I need the meeting like this week, so some growing pains. Yeah.
So let's talk about structure just for a moment. So do you report to, is there a CEO for your unit, or is there a
yes,
corporate affairs CEO for the whole company?
Yeah, so I report to the head of the whole Rockies business unit. There's about 12 of us. And so half are what we call kind of legacy Noble and half are legacy Chevron. And they did that by design so we can learn from each other. And then I also have a dotted line in the organizational structure. I have a dotted line to the head of corporate affairs. And so that person's been awesome and really does support and provide counsel. And I get to check in with her, once a week. And if I need something, particularly in a new company, like, where do I find that? Where is that? So I've kind of got two bosses. But then we try to support, again, the whole business unit. We've got offices here, and then we've got offices more in northern Colorado and Wyoming too.
Because if there's 180 countries involved, multinational units, keeping the messaging consistent and being able to pivot quickly, those are huge challenges.
Yeah.
From what you've seen right now, how do they deal with that, and what are some of the ways they need to improve, you think?
Well, I'm just, kind of beginning to see behind the curtain. I think, again, some of the overarching messaging, and that really comes to culture. What are your values?
Yeah, right.
What are your culture? Right. So in our, Noble has Chevron has kind of a vision where, we want to be most admired as an energy company for its people, its partnerships, and its performance. So we have to have high performance. We have to have partnerships. That's not only like our social investment, philanthropy partners, but partners in the communities. And then one thing and I kind of wish I'd found this company, so I'll encourage people who are interested in working in this field. I wish I had found a company like this when I was younger, because there's so much opportunity to come and if you can move and you can pivot, like there's this Horizons program. So you want to do a stint over in Australia, and you can do that. And there's just a lot of ways that you can grow your career and stay within the same company, but get really, really rich experiences and some of that. But, so I would say back to your question, a lot of that kind of top level is about, what are our values? What's our kind of vision? So that's what I think the corporate, office and it's not just in San Ramon, that's where they're headquartered, but that's where they provide the structure of kind of how we're going to live, how we're going to work. We have a lot of performance management and leading performance, how we treat our teams, how we make sure we're accessible. And then, but messaging on a local level, it has to be local, right? It can't be Chevron says this is what we have to talk about, because if it doesn't fit our community, then it's not authentic and it's not relevant.
Right. Right. Are you part of the crisis communication team, or have you been in the past in Noble Energy? I'm interested
Yeah.
in that aspect, since we cover that later in the semester.
I have been on both. So I'm on the crisis management team now, and I was on the crisis management team in my previous role at Noble. And then before that, I've worked for companies, agencies where I was on the crisis team, and we write the crisis plan, and it's really evolved. Where before it was kind of a big old binder,
right,
write it and you stick it on the shelf. Mom's job does that. And, you might dust it off once in a while, but now it's much more, pivot in real time. So some of the work we do, like right now, I really wouldn't call it crisis yet, but so COVID has been one of our greatest crisis management teams that's been stood up, both when I was at Noble and now at Chevron.
Yeah.
And when it first started, we were meeting daily, like 6 a.m. daily. Wow. And everybody was on the team. You had a big, secure conference room. We had a crisis plan, of course, but you're getting real-time information, making decisions, and then making recommendations for the CEO and his, few execs of what things we should do. And that was, when do we start working from home? I mean, those decisions happened very quickly. How do we communicate to our employees? All of that was kind of involved in that. And then just as people began I really felt that the communications team took the brunt of the work, because all these employees are now working from home, but we have to communicate to them, right? And we have to communicate in real time and help them with, whether it's IT needs or what they need. And so I found that to be exhilarating. I mean, it was very important work, and we were able to do that. So other crisis work that I've done, I wasn't really working directly, I wasn't in the company, but on the agency side, we had a house explosion here in Colorado several years ago, and you can Google it. It's Firestone house explosion will come up. And it wasn't what happened is this gentleman and his brother-in-law, I think, were working on a water heater, and it blew. And so it wasn't I guess it was tied into the wells, or it wasn't cut off, I think, properly. Right. So it wasn't our wells. It was one of our competitors, but we had owned that well about 15 years prior. So, were we going to be brought into that? So there was a lot of work, and, and that poor family, they lost both the husband and I think the brother-in-law in that crisis. So there's been a lot of different, I like to say you try to manage as much of your issues management before it goes to crisis, right? You try to prepare, and preparedness is probably the number one thing. But a lot of ours can be response. There was a lot of flooding in Colorado back in 2013, and I worked on that, partnering with the Red Cross, and how do we get, necessarily supplies and all of that. So there've been a host of them. Crisis work is so important, but preparedness before that, making sure you know exactly your role, exactly who's on the team, and being as prepared as you can be.
What are some of the crises you guys have discussed and are prepared for that haven't happened, but what are the kind of things that are top of mind as a crisis
that haven't happened? I think we do a lot from an incident point of view. So say if there's well, for instance, we had a gala it was a virtual gala on Saturday night, and it was with a medical center. And it was the very first donation that we got, I got Chevron to donate to. And the reason it was important to me was that is where the burn center is in Colorado. So if someone is ever injured, on a rig, or there's an explosion, or that's where our employees would go. So that's important. So I think, for a lot of the crises that maybe have either not happened, and we monitor that, we have health, environmental, and safety. We monitor that really closely to make sure, there's not methane gas going into the air. There's not, again, incidents like explosions or someone hurt. Like we had, and I wasn't really working on this, but on my previous company, we had someone that was shot, and a contractor came out, had a gun, and got spooked and shot him. Well, that went against policy of having a loaded weapon. So those sorts of things, and litigation, kind of associated with some of those things.
Yeah, because one of the things we'll discuss in class is how to get out in front of it, but how to show some compassion first before you start kind of covering your company's rear.
Well, and I think, and I know you may have had Linda Rutherford speak to your class. If you haven't, she's also on the National Association Board Professionals. She works with Southwest Airlines. She's a
Yeah.
tech grad, and so in the airline industry, they really do have a lot of a crisis and having
Right.
to deal with that. But I think she would agree with me on this, is that the most important thing in our trainings, and we have preparedness drills and a lot of things like that, but is having timely information and putting information out in a way
Right.
that people can receive it quickly. That may be on Twitter, that may be, whatever that is, but sitting back the days of letting the CEO kind of gnaw on it for a couple of days just doesn't work.
Right.
Your reputation can be ruined quickly
Yeah.
by doing that.
Yeah. You were director of media relations for the National Association of Manufacturers.
Right.
And tell me, if you were doing that nowadays, how the job would be different? Because we think of press releases, all of those back, and now it's
Yeah.
social media. How would the job be different? How would you manage it if you're doing that now?
It has really changed, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I guess that really dates me, but it was, we were doing press releases and we were doing press conferences. We did a monthly press conference with our CEO, and they were largely financial reporters. And they worked very well for us. We really got our message out. But we also had great relationships with reporters.
Yeah.
And you had to, because you weren't reaching them on Twitter or whatever. I think that's the one caveat. I mean, we weren't doing videos, like nobody was doing videos.
Right.
They weren't the social platforms. I think that's the one true and tried that what I have found a lot of interns who worked for me and folks coming out of college, that sometimes they don't want to pick up the phone and talk to a reporter. And you still have to do that. You still have to have a relationship.
Great point. Yeah.
And they have, often, because those newsrooms have been consolidated and merged and whatever, so they're juggling many more beats. And so it takes even more so, I think, more effort to get to know them. So part of one of my previous positions, I would have goals for my team to go out and meet, every quarter, 5 new reporters.
Oh,
and develop
great
a relationship. And they were judged on their performance, on if they did that and who were those reporters and how well could they engage. So I think that part has not changed. Again, video, I love the video piece. We weren't really doing that then. When I went to Capitol Hill, I was doing a lot of satellite videos because I had a broadcast background, right? So I would do those. But, the way that you can storytell through video is amazing. And we're going to do a lot of that here in this position of my team and I. Chevron does a lot of it on the corporate level. And I think that's important too. If you don't have an organization within the college, do that. I know there's the PRSA societies, there's different groups, and the ad age and different things like that you can become involved in. It really does help you build that resume and build that portfolio of work so that they can, you can use that when you're knocking on doors and trying to get a job.
I know a lot of my students would love to meet you now that they've gotten to hear from you. So I appreciate it so much, Trudi. Have a great day.
Thank you. No, it's been great to meet you, and I do look forward to being back on campus. And like I said, I was living back in Lubbock I lived there for about 4 years this previous time before I moved to Houston. So I will look forward to meeting those students. I've met a lot over the years, and we try to help them with internships and things like that. So encourage them to reach out on that.
We will. Thanks so much.